So I think in this time of crisis, we sometimes forget that there's another side of the story. There's a reason, of course, why these countries entered into this monetary union in the first place. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about both the macroeconomic costs, and there I'll talk about some of the things that David touched on, but also some of the macroeconomic benefits of the European Monetary Union. So let me start with this picture of Euro area government gross debt as a percentage of GDP. This is a 2011 forecast. And here, of course, you can see the outliers that we're all used to seeing in red. Countries like Italy, Portugal, Ireland, and Greece. These are countries that we know are embroiled in crisis now, the countries that we feel have suffered greatly in some sense from the crisis associated with the Euro area. But it's important to remember that these are also, in a sense, the countries that benefited most from the formation of this European Monetary Union. So here's a picture of interest rates on 10-year government bonds over the period 1995 to 2011. You can see the introduction of the euro and, of course, the more recent crisis. And what you can see from this is that it's exactly these same countries, countries like Greece, Ireland, and Portugal, that experienced really big declines in the interest rates at which they were able to borrow, associated with the formation of the European monetary unions. So essentially, associated with the EMU, we saw this remarkable convergence of interest rates, essentially to the interest rates that countries like Germany were paying to borrow on their debt. And even these countries were able to borrow at these low rates. Now, perhaps it's not surprising that there was a major decrease in perceived inflation risk associated with the start of the euro area. It might be more surprising in retrospect that people perceived such a big decline in the risk of literal default by these countries. It might seem surprising that that's what people perceive given what's happening today, given that it seems like, in fact, that risk of literal default is not, in fact, so low. But in any case, you can see that there was a major impact for these countries in terms of the rates at which they were able to borrow over this time period. And of course, since then, this is somewhat unraveled. I also want to mention that in some sense, these types of benefits should be familiar from our own country. So here I'm drawing on a diagram from the Nobel Prize lecture by Tom Sargent. And what he points out is that there's an interesting parallel between the euro area crisis today and things that have happened in the history of our own country, the United States. So in the case of the United States, of course, we know that today the US is both a fiscal and a monetary union. We share the same currency across different states, and also the federal government has powers to both tax, strong powers to both tax and spend. But in fact, it wasn't always the case. So back in the late 1700s, the federal government had much reduced powers to tax. So it was the United States was much less of a fiscal union than it is today. And in exchange for increased powers to tax, there were actually a sequence of important bailouts of the states in the late 1700s. Now, subsequently, it was sort of realized that perhaps this was not a good precedent, and over time, in the early 1800s, so there were big run-ups of state debts during that period, but there was an explicit decision during that period not to bail out the states, and there were actually a number of state defaults in the early 1800s. So over time, there was this evolution in the case of the United States, starting out being perhaps a monetary union, but not so much of a fiscal union, into a true fiscal union, and also the establishment of this explicit policy not to bail out the states. So now let me just spend a few minutes talking about the costs of a monetary and fiscal union to relate to what David mentioned. So from the perspective of macroeconomics, a very important cost of a monetary union is associated with the reduced amount of labor market flexibility. So here I think it's interesting to compare the cases of Europe, countries which had a fixed exchange rate, with countries that didn't have a fixed exchange rate, and in particular I'm going to mention the case of Argentina. And here I'm borrowing slides from my colleagues Martina Uribe and Stephanie Schmidt-Roque in the economics department. So here is a picture of the evolution of the current account deficit of wages, the labor cost index, and of the unemployment rate for the peripheral European countries. And this is over the period between 2002 and the present. And you can see that in the run-up to this crisis, there was this enormous boom, that's this period here, this enormous party where you saw a huge current account deficit, enormous capital inflows, and major declines in the unemployment rate. In 2008, there was this enormous sudden stop, this incredible sudden stop. We saw a very rapid reversal of the current account deficit and a rapid increase in the unemployment rate. Now take a look at the case of wages. So over this period of this enormous boom, there was this very rapid increase in wages. But then, when you come to this sudden stop in 2008, while it's true that the pace at which wages were rising sort of declined, there was no decline in wages. So there was no decline in wages. Wages stayed, pretty high, and they were already at this very elevated level. You can look at the fact that they rose by, something like 80% over this period, and they remained high, and the unemployment rate rose dramatically over this period. And of course, this is associated with the fact that these are countries that had a fixed exchange rate. So to contrast this with the case of a country with a flexible exchange rate, if you look instead at the case of Argentina, so here's Argentina over the period between 1996 and 2006, and of course they had a major devaluation in 2002. Here, if you take a look at the nominal wage in the lead up to this period, it looks sort of similar. So from respect to the nominal wage, there was an increase over this period, and then over the period of the crisis, actually the nominal wage continued to increase. However, in 2002, so Argentina was a little bit different because, of course, this was not a boom in the preceding period. But in 2002, at the time of this major exchange rate devaluation, this exchange rate devaluation was associated with a major decline in the real wage. So even though nominal wages, as you can see here, actually continued to increase over this period, if you look at the real wage in the right-hand graph, you see that there was a dramatic decrease in the real wage. And then if you look at the unemployment rate graph, you can see that this is exactly the point at which there was a turning point in unemployment. So this is the power of flexible exchange rates. If you take a look, on the one hand, in the case of Europe, you see that the nominal wages continued to increase, but because of the fixed exchange rate, that was what was happening to real wages too. In contrast, in the case of Argentina, there continued to be these increases in nominal wages, but there was actually a dramatic decline in the real wage associated with this massive exchange rate devaluation in the case of Argentina. So we all know what happened in the case of the United States. The United States moved increasingly in the direction of being both a fiscal union and a monetary union. We face similar issues to this, similar costs to this in the United States today. So we know that there were major problems, for example, in the auto industry in the past few years. If we'd had a flexible exchange rate, there probably would have been a major devaluation between Michigan and the rest of the United States, and that might have helped the adjustment. But of course, that didn't happen. We decided that the benefits of a fiscal and monetary union outweighed the costs, but we also decided that it was hard to have a monetary union without also having a fiscal union and strong powers of taxation. So I think these are the questions, whether Europe wants to become more integrated and go further in the direction of the U.S. model, or perhaps if it wants to go more in the direction of a small open economy. These are the questions that I think will be resolved in the future.